The reading for the day of Epiphany, which was this past Tuesday. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we have observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for it has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, so that I may go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So miscalculations are sometimes part of life. We don't always get it right. As I mentioned earlier, I took a week off after Christmas, a couple Sundays, and Sue and I relaxed very differently from each other. She likes things like museums, and she likes to read mysteries, sewing, looks at house plans, goes to open houses, and I can do that for a few minutes. But my best relaxation happens in wide open green places. Fields of freshly mowed grass, occasionally surrounded by little stretches of sand or water. But I don't really like to be in the sand much, and I try to avoid the water. The fields I like to hang out in have yardage markers and tiny little holes in the ground about 3 inches wide. I leisurely pass the day hitting a little white ball, or yellow if you're Mike Lake, with a set of sticks, and I add up almost all the times I hit it. Golf has a lot of miscalculations in it, a lot of potential for miscalculation. I choose a 9-iron and come up 25 yards short, and I needed an 8. I make a putt and calculate the strength of the putt, and it goes too far, and I hear the dreaded words, "You're still away." We also sometimes miscalculate when we estimate how long it's going to take to drive somewhere. I might say 2 hours, and then I fail to take the traffic into account. Sue sometimes occasionally miscalculates how long it's going to take her to get ready, for example. She's usually ready way sooner than she thought. But those miscalculations are rarely life-threatening. And sometimes there's more serious miscalculations, like navigating an airplane, for example, and missing the runway by just a few yards. A little more serious than missing a green. Well, our text this morning indicates that our travelers from the east kind of miscalculated a little. They end up in Jerusalem when they should have been in Bethlehem. They're called wise men. But as we see here, wise men are sometimes wrong. They don't always get it right. Most historians say that these wise men were of a priestly caste. They show up from time to time in the Bible as a group that the kings would often call on to settle disputes or to solve problems. You can read an example of their work in Daniel, for example. Extra biblical sources also have these wise men attached to royal courts in Babylon and in Persia, also in India and Arabia. They're consultants to the kings, to royalty. The kings relied on them. They're called magi, translated here wise men, but it's probably more like a family name than it is a direct translation here. But this is what they did. This is the way they lived. Kind of like Levites in Israel. Evidently, they stay up on world events. They study the stars. They paid attention to ancient texts. They were scientists of a sort, and there was a combination between astronomy and astrology as they worked to try to answer riddles and give the king advice. So this text says that they saw his star rise in the east. And I don't think what we're talking about is a bright ball of light that was just 10 feet over their heads leading them on. That's not, aside from the depictions that we might see on drawings, that's probably not what this was. This was from their study of astrology and astronomy and maybe a little input from the captive Israelites. They began to make these calculations that probably referred to a special alignment of stars. In fact, you can study this. It's quite fascinating. I was going to bore you for a while, but I decided to not go there. Go look this up, and you will see that there are a lot of theories as to these alignments of the stars that would lead them sort of in this direction. So these wise men show up in Jerusalem looking for he that was born King of the Jews, which would, of course, be really hard for Herod to hear because he is proclaimed king, but he wasn't Jewish. So he just sort of proclaimed himself king. And here were these consultants to the kings asking, where was this one who was born King of the Jews? There are a few other, probably a few myths that we need to debunk here. There were probably more than 3. So sorry about that. Probably more than 3. Nowhere does it say there were 3. There were 3 gifts, but there were probably more than 3 here. And they weren't kings. They were consultants to the king. So much for we 3 kings. And they probably had a military escort with them. They probably were a large group of travelers from the empire of Persia. Okay, we're not talking about just these lonely guys, walking along the streets thinking, let's go look for the king. These guys probably had an entourage and a military escort with them. And they probably weren't on camels. So if they're from Persia, they're going to be on horseback. And Persia was known for its horses. And they were probably on very impressive horses. So this is a very respected group of people coming into this very small nation of Israel. These guys are from Persia with probably a military escort with them, looking for this one born King of the Jews. And as a side note, this has nothing to do with my sermon, what I'm going to tell you right now. I learned from my daughter yesterday that because of their love for horses, the Persians invented high heels. And they were initially men's shoes. And they were used for their horseback riding. And if you want to find out how they became ladies' shoes, you corner Amy later and she'll tell you all about it. One other thing. They probably didn't go to the manger. I read in our song this morning, they went to the manger. Probably not the manger. This was probably much after that. Mary and Joseph were probably in a house by now. And they came seeking it, because it says house in our text. They probably didn't go to the manger. It was probably many, many months after Jesus had been born that these wise men from the east come. Indicated, by the way, by Herod killing all the babies under 2 years old as they calculate how long ago it had been since they saw the star. But these scholars, for all their intellect and all their effort and all their instincts, they ended up in the wrong spot. They were really smart guys. They assumed that this new ruler would be born in Jerusalem. I mean, why wouldn't you think that a king would be born in the palace? Of course you'd go to the palace. Of course you'd go to the palace. Where else is the baton of power passed on? But they weren't right about that. You see, this ruler would not use the politics of power or military or coercion. It would be a different kind of kingdom, and the stars didn't let him in on that part. He would turn away from hostility and abuse and coercion and force. He would influence the world in a different way. So what I like about these wise men, these smart guys, they weren't too smart that they couldn't learn. Here they were, and they get it wrong, and they make a correction. Isn't that good? Maybe that's why they were so wise. Maybe what's really wise about them is their interest in learning, their openness to other ways of thinking, their willingness to dialogue, to be taught by the scribes of Israel. The scribes and the rulers come and tell them, oh no, you got the wrong prophecy. I mean, you want to backhand them if you're a wise man, wouldn't you? Do you know who I am? How dare you tell me that I have it wrong? Not these guys. They were not afraid to learn. So the story of the wise men coming to Bethlehem is always the story read on Epiphany. When they come to pay homage to Jesus. And so it's a way for us to begin a conversation on the relationship between Jesus and the rest of the world. This is what Epiphany is about. This is what the season of Epiphany is about. What is the relationship of Jesus as Messiah to the rest of the world? The world outside of Judaism. And these wise men represent that rest of the world. So that's what Epiphany is about. We know how Jesus relates to his own people. He's the Messiah, the Savior, the Deliverer. But what about the rest of the world? What about the Gentiles and the members of other cultures and other religions? By the way, you can read Acts 15 and find out that it wasn't long before this became a real serious issue in the church at Jerusalem. So we're going to begin a series of conversations through the season on the topic of Jesus in a multi-ethnic, multicultural, and multi-faith world. That's what we're going to be talking about for the next few weeks. So these Persian wise men, they're not Jewish. They're probably members of a religion similar to Zoroastrianism, and yet they pay homage to Jesus. I'm assuming they did not afterwards become Jewish after this encounter. But it would be interesting to know, how did this experience with this child Jesus affect their understanding of their own culture and their own religion? We don't know that. So the title of the series that we're going to be in together for a little while is called, Why Did Jesus, Moses, the Buddha, and Muhammad Cross the Road? It's the title of the book that we're going to be reading, for those of you interested, by Brian McLaren. And we'll let you know more about that. We'll have some discussions over it. It's a very important book, I think. And the answer to that riddle is not quite as important as the imagined conversation of what a meeting like that might reveal. So how would these leaders and influential people treat each other if they met by the side of the road to cross? What would they say? Would they cross together, or would they move down the street to cross? Would they talk to each other? Would they avoid one another? We also had appalled, as was mentioned again this week, as yet another horrific, violent event happened in the name of religion in Paris. 2 brothers carrying out their commitment to Islam and to Muhammad. Carried out that commitment by killing 12 people from Charlie Hebdo magazine because of a cartoon. Then another 7 killed in a related event at a kosher market nearby. So let me ask you this question. Don't you think our world is getting tired of the superiority view of religion? Don't you think we've had about enough of that? Isn't it time to rethink the idea of my God is bigger and better than your God? Really? We still going to hold on to that one? It is true that those acting violently now or in the past were and are religious extremists. That's clear. Taking certain ideas too far or out of context, we say. But is there something within our religious systems that allows for that extremism to develop, and no religion is immune? Is there a hidden or not so hidden superiority or arrogance that provides the seeds of hostility and violence that we need to address? What do you think? Even if we do not do acts of hostility and violence, do we need to rethink our understanding of our faith in a way that is less arrogant and less dominant, that might in the end fuel violence in some? Is there a way, because we need to talk about Christianity, we're not Muslim, but is there a way to be Christian and move from hostility to hospitality without watering down our commitment to Jesus? In fact, by becoming more committed to our faith in Jesus? Is there a way to be Christian, to be a committed Christian, to believe that being a Christian is important and beneficial for the world without believing that those who don't agree with me are less smart, less informed, less aware of the truth, and possibly in trouble with God? And does for the world, beneficial for the world, also carry with it destruction or substitution or the end of other religions? Is that what we would wish for? That everybody in the whole world would be a member of the Christian church? Is that our ultimate goal and design and hope? Do you think that's biblical? Do we? These are interesting questions. I'm not answering any of them. Just giving them to you. Think about it. Ever since Constantine in 312 AD, for Christians, the answer to some of those questions has been mostly no. There is no way to think about Christianity other than through dominance. Ever since Constantine had his vision of the cross with the words under it, "Conquer by this," we have been saddled with a violent, superior, inhospitable theology of the other. And according to many theologians, it's time we rethought that a little bit. How did it happen? How did it happen that the most exclusive and narrow and intolerant of diversity views are seen as the most committed to their religion? How is that? How did that happen? Why are they called fundamentalists? Why aren't the most tolerant and loving and open and kind called fundamentalists? Aren't they more followers of Jesus than the other? Did Jesus ever kill anybody who didn't agree with him? Isn't that the opposite of what he taught and did? Seems to me fundamentalists ought to be reserved for those who are most open, most kind, most loving. As Christians, is there a way for us to view Christian theology where the most committed Christian is the most tolerant of diversity? Wouldn't that be a nice change in how we understand those things? The most dedicated follower of Jesus is the most non-judgmental. So often the tolerant are viewed as soft on their commitments. Wishy-washy. on their dedication. If you question that, you're viewed as not dedicated, not committed. What if there's a way of seeing and understanding the theology of the other where the most orthodox and the most biblical Christian is the most open, hospitable, non-aggressive, not offensive, respectful, curious, compassionate, and kind? What if that's the most orthodox position? Where the more like Jesus we become, the more people we're able to embrace, affirm, value, serve, support, love. Anyone we meet, whatever their background, culture, religion, we embrace them. What if that's what it means to be like Jesus? Is there a way to see our faith where the more dedicated to Christ we become, the less likely we are to undermine the religion of someone else? And the less interested we are of someone becoming like me? It's hard. We come from Constantine forward. We don't have a way to think about this stuff. Except maybe our hope would be that they might embrace the same level of hospitality towards us that we have towards them. Since the time of Constantine, it has been assumed that the primary goal of Christians in the world is to dominate the world with the Christian message and the Christian religion. We now understand the evils of colonialism in the name of Christ. It's well documented. And other oppressions. Imperial expansion called Christendom are wedded to Christian theology and used by the state to dominate and abuse others. That's what happened. We may have stopped trying to dominate and abuse others. We've learned a few things. But our hostile way of understanding our commitment to faith is still sort of on the books. And it is a dangerous ideology, I think. What if instead our primary job toward the other is not recruitment or proselytizing, but hospitality? What if our primary job is affirming, welcoming, loving, compassionate, rather than judging, condemning, destroying, and undermining? And what if you can demonstrate that anything other than that is contrary to Jesus? What if following Jesus is living in loving respect for the other, even towards those who don't respect you? What if that is the good news of following Jesus? Following Him in an open embrace for all, where we demonstrate that being right is not the most important thing about being a follower of Jesus. It obviously was not the most important thing to Jesus Himself. What if what is most transformative about the gospel is not where we get everyone to believe and act the same way, but where we all treat each other with the same level of respect, love, affirmation, and hospitality? What if that's the transformation we're after? What if that was what Jesus came to do? Rather than start just one more religion bent on superiority and hostility towards others. Questions I hope that we can address over the course of the next few weeks. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.